They'd then grind those oats into a coarse flour, kind of like the consistency of whole wheat cereal, but way more work. No fancy ovens needed. They just heated stones by the fire, like ancient cast iron skillets without the heavy handle.
Aha, Doodles.
With a pinch of wild herbs for zing, they cooked a doughy batter that warmed their bellies long before fancy mix-ins existed. Tiny wild yeast stole the show, blooming into airy bubbles that made the flatbread rise like a modern sourdough hugging the griddle. Doodle: a cartoon yeast cell wearing a tiny party hat popping out of a puffy ancient bread loaf with a happy face. Key: wild yeast. Emotion: playful surprise. SFX: gentle pop and cheerful giggle. Across the sea in Egypt, folks baked dense grain loaves in sun-baked clay ovens, way before the invention of toaster strudels. But the Aztecs later took that brew so seriously, they'd pay you in cacao beans just for a warm cup to sip before battle. The stakes were high. Aztec nobles drank it with chili, foam, and gold. No sweeteners allowed, unlike your modern sugar rush latte. Freestyle blending made it frothy, though. Long before blenders, folks used a simple stick to whip the foam into a froth that rivals your morning cappuccino. Fast forward to 17th century Spain, where monks secretly sweetened that bitter brew for royal breakfasts, accidentally inventing the world's first guilty pleasure. Then in 1847, fries in England cracked the code by adding cocoa butter to melt it into a squishy, edible bar. Just centuries earlier, Mongol emissaries mastered frozen milk slush, packing it in horse bladders for a super cool snack on the steppe. Genghis Khan's own grandson, Kublai Khan, was a huge fan of this chili treat, which was basically ancient Mongolia's version of a Slurpee. Some rich bigwigs even added crushed rose petals or pine nuts. Because why settle for plain ice when you're dining like a literal emperor? Ancient Mesopotamians also made a sweet, icy treat around 2000 BC, kind of like a primitive snow cone. The Romans later perfected this chili habit, even importing snow from the Alps to chill their fancy grape juices with honey and pine nuts. Fast forward to 1905, when 11-year-old Frank Epperson in Oakland, California, created a tasty treat by accident. Just like we all do. Maybe the real treat was the accidental discovery that freezing sugary juice on a stick beats waiting for a modern ice cream truck. Frank Epperson, an 11-year-old in Oakland, California, accidentally invented this icy treat in 1905 by leaving a mixing container with powdered soda on his porch. He named it the Epsicle, a frosty stumble that wouldn't hit frozen charm until 1923 when he finally sold the rights. Meanwhile, Babylonian taverns were already serving barley beer in clay cups, turning grain into a fizzy treat long before soda fountains ever opened. Centuries later, a bored English chemist named Joseph Priestley accidentally carbonated water by hanging a jug over a local brewery's fermenting vat. He called this fizzy drink soda water, and was so proud, he even described the bubbles dancing like tiny champagne spirits. Schweppes didn't just sell fizz. He bottled air pressure like a wizard and sold it by the glass in Geneva. Then those fancy Romans added honey and pine resin to their snow wine, basically inventing the first stiff cocktail party trick. Skip to the Silk Road, where travelers chewed bitter beetle nuts to stay wide awake during long, boring camel naps. Doodle: a cartoon camel yawning while a traveler chews a glowing red nut and suddenly pops up with giant eyes. Key: beetle nuts. Emotion: curious amusement. SFX: soft camel grunt followed by a comical cartoon boing. But wait, he didn't just toss them over. The monks in Yemen later roasted these beans into a dark, aromatic elixir that made them bounce better than a toddler on a trampoline. Before that, the beans were just raw food chewed by Ethiopian tribes to stay awake during long hunts. Not quite a latte yet. Chocolate bar. They cracked those beans open in Sana'a, Yemen, roasting them over open fires like today's artisanal vibes, not just a quick boil. Before beans became a drink, Ottoman cooks roasted them to make a thick, spicy gruel that warmed soldiers faster than a traffic jam. Some Ethiopian warriors snacked on raw, mashed coffee cherries for a wild energy burst, long before anyone figured out roasting was the secret sauce. Arab traders whisked the roasted beans into a frothy, bitter brew called kawa, which gave Cairo a jittery buzz stronger than your phone's morning notifications. By the 1600s, kawa was a staple in Cairo's markets, like a daily fix of espresso for the city's busy traders. By 1675, England had over 80 coffee houses, like hip co-working spaces, fueling discussions and ideas. Actually, long before English coffee houses, sailors in the Red Sea roasted beans over open flames for a dark, bitter brew that kept them wide awake. By 1652, London's first cafe opened, charging just a penny for coffee that had folks buzzing louder than a group text chat. Later, coffee shops like Lloyd's became hubs for shipping news, turning daily gossip into the ultimate startup incubator before the term existed. These seed-filled bars, which actually kept pirates and gentry alert, survived because no one was showing up to open a restaurant yet. While kings panicked, Pope Clement VIII actually tasted a black brew and lovingly baptized it Devil's Coffee instead of banning it. That 1600s decree meant coffee was the legal secret sauce for monks staying awake during long, boring prayers. Enter Pasquale Rossi, a Greek-Armenian trader who started London's first coffee house in 1652, turning sleepy ale drinkers into jittery news junkies faster than a viral tweet. Like modern coffee houses, Lloyd's in 1688 became a pirate pilot hangout, trading insurance notes instead of pastries for shipwrecks. Maybe that's why, centuries later, a giant coxcomb named Samuel Pepys wrote about eating hot buns in the rain instead of just watching ships sink. Fast forward to 1853, when Saratoga Springs chef George Crumb got tired of complaints about soggy potatoes and sliced them paper thin by accident. That accidental mashup, crispy and salty, instantly became the Saratoga chip, proving sometimes the best snacks are total kitchen disasters. Legend says Chef George Crumb sliced potatoes so thin a cranky diner's tough-as-nails complaint turned them into crispy gold coins. He called them Saratoga chips after his hometown, proving that sometimes the best snacks are just happy accidents born from a customer's bad mood. Legend says he sliced them so thin they shimmered like edible glass, snapping with a crunch louder than your phone's vibration alarm. He called them Saratoga chips and sold them at his own Moon Lake house until they were the celebrity snack of 1860. Actually, a chef named George Crumb sliced potatoes thin on purpose in 1853 to spite a picky diner who sent his meal back twice. Kellogg was running a health spa in Battle Creek, Michigan, where he experimented with grains to create easy-to-digest foods. Kellogg's spa guests were served plain toast, which led to a eureka moment, flaking grains for easier eating. But wait, before Kellogg's spa, a Michigan doctor named Jackson actually invented granula, a dry, unflavored brick that required overnight soaking to bite. That soda-soaked brick was so tough, it could double as a hammer for your morning commute. But true breakfast flakes weren't an accident at Kellogg's, but a clever fix by his brother Will at a dry Battle Creek sanitarium. Will's CW Post later watched his own health food empire vanish into a fluffy marshmallow cloud of sugary necklaces. Before fancy cookbooks, ancient folks just boiled leftover bones in a thick, savory broths that kept everyone warm through the long winter nights. Then an eager English inventor named John Lissoy tried boiling beef down, but also ended up with a greasy paste that smelled like old gym socks. Luckily, German chemist Justus von Liebig showed the world how to turn that gross goo into a proper jar of stock cube magic. That thick beef concentrate later inspired the label on a certain shiny red sauce sitting in your fridge right now. Actually, ancient Romans called their fishy sauce garum, keeping huge jars of fermented gut goo near their sunny windowsills. The Romans also used garum as a medicine, which is pretty funny considering it was basically fishy fish sauce. But while some folks were slurping fish mash, a different game started brewing near the Yellow River with wild fermented grains. Long before tea parties, Shinong actually boiled wild grains into a thick, sticky mush that stuck to the pot more than his morning socks. That sticky mess eventually became a staple, but different regions invented their own grain soups long before the first recipe book hit the shelf. While potatoes waited, the 1906 Chicago meat scandal exposed so much icky gunk that Congress passed a law to stop our lunch from being a horror show. That gross mess scared folks into making health codes. So now we wash our hands instead of hoping for the best. Let's zoom in on a breakfast pancake that looks nothing like your fluffy stack today. Now imagine ancient Athens, where hungry folks fried grain batter on hot rocks for a breakfast that was basically a crumbly stone cookie. Philosopher Plato even joked that this gritty flapjack tasted like the dusty floor it was baked on. That stone-ground mush took forever to digest, making your tummy feel like a locked iron box waiting for yeast to show up. For centuries, cooks just guessed the rising power, often mixing gritty eggshells with fear until reliable new ingredients finally kicked in. Enter Alfred Bird, the Bristol baker who needed a yeast-free lift, mixing specific ingredients while his tummy waited. He whipped up a combo of baking soda and cream of tartar, kind of like a baking hack for his yeast-free woes. That quick chemical reaction happened fast, like a magic pop in a microwave instead of slow oven wait. So when an ancient baker forgot his dough, a wild yeast sneeze turned it into airy bread, way before we needed a fancy recipe book. Actually, those gridiron treats likely started in medieval Flanders, like a monk's fancy toast, not a Roman breakfast table. Like today, let's add a fun visual fact. We need a doodle idea. The emotion should be curious. A sizzle sound effect fits perfectly. Those fancy ublies were actually simple wafers pressed between hot cast iron rods. Kind of like a medieval toaster you had to flip with both hands. That heavy metal got super hot, so people started flipping the treats inside like modern pancakes to keep their fingers safe. By the 1300s, French cooks were tossing these golden squares into buttery pans, proving early gourmet flair beat any sticky spade every time. They likely used hot metal rings to shape the dough, creating meat bites much faster than a modern cookie cutter could manage. Imagine a stone-age mom grilling puree on a rock, skipping the messy bowl for a hot, crispy snack in seconds. Tell that to the ancients who slapped honey, sesame, and dates on it grains long before fancy cookbooks showed up. Fast forward to Michigan, where a grumpy cereal tycoon named Kellogg decided breakfast needed less grease and more sunshine. So the fellow next door, Will, watched this gloomy act and flipped the script to invent something sweet enough to make you skip the gym. He experimented with flaking wheat berries, like a breakfast game changer. World War I then forced bakers to swap fresh dough for dry, hardtack-style jack bread that tasted like a salty cracker stuck to your roof. Enter C.W. Post, who experimented with flaking grains like corn and rice, creating a lighter breakfast option. That crunchy snack idea was so new that Post even sold his medicine before folks realized breakfast could just be fun. Actually, ancient Romans mixed licorice pollen into honey cakes to soothe sore throats. Basically the ancient equivalent of popping a cough drop before a school play. The ancient Greeks also used licorice to calm coughs, and Hippocrates, a famous doctor, prescribed it too. That same Balkan root got mashed with barley into a gritty porridge soldiers called mazza to crunch down holy hunger pangs. But Romans swapped that honey mash for sour pasca, a tart vinegar sip that beat back thirst like nature's own Gatorade. Soldiers drank it from clay rhytons because leather would have turned that vinegar into a sour, stinky snack.